Thank you very much, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. It's another episode of Tax Tech and Other Stuff, and another guest today. And today's our first international guest. We've got dialing in all the way from Cambodia, no less. So here with me, really, really pleased to have David Benaim. Well, it's been a while. We've known each other for 16-ish years, but tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am based in Cambodia, as you said, Russell. I am also a tax accountant. We started our professional lives together, I guess, at Deloitte, that we'll get
Very
to in
good.
a little bit. And then after I was done with that, wanted a bit of a change. I ended up coming to Cambodia for 2 months for a volunteering placement that I found. And then that kind of transformed my career. I ended up setting up shop where I run a consulting and training organization, focusing a lot on Excel and data systems. So I became obsessed with Excel, as we'll talk about quite a lot during this podcast.
Yeah.
And I started training in Excel and I started building systems and data and accounting using Excel. And then I moved on into Power BI and some of the business analytics visualization space as well. I also have a YouTube channel that I started up about 5 years ago, just hit 15,000 subscribers yesterday.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I post a lot about technology on LinkedIn as well. So my LinkedIn name is David Benaim New in Tech because I love posting about brand new stuff that's just hit Excel or Google Sheets or Power BI or PowerPoint or Canva or other kind of business technology areas like that. And I also do some amateur stand-up comedy, sometimes related
Nice.
to Excel. Yeah, and
That Venn diagram intersection between Excel and stand-up comedy must be a pretty tiny intersection. Can't be too many people in that space. And yeah,
yeah.
to be, you're in my LinkedIn feed, you're always popping up every few days with some genuinely interesting stuff. Like I feel like I don't need to go anywhere else for my what's coming new in Excel stuff because it always kind of pops through. And I know you do. And we'll talk a bit about your stuff you do with ICAW and all the rest of it. So genuinely pleased to have you here and a bit of a different take on things, right? Because I think, and this is a bit of a preface to some of the stuff we'll talk about, but there always tends to be a bit of should you use Excel for this? Oh, error prone, audit trails, and all these sorts of things. And yeah, totally understand all of that. But equally, Excel is absolutely an accountant's favorite tool. And therefore, it's something that we all use and should use probably better, but we'll talk more about that. But we trained together with the CT intake of Deloitte of 2008.
Yeah.
So a little while ago. So in terms of, I guess, your time over in Cambodia, what changed? 2 month volunteering placement to 16 years kind of living there, or well, maybe not 16, but got a while living there. What was that journey? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed my time at Deloitte, and obviously we both did the ACA,
Yeah.
the Chartered Accountancy qualification, and it was really great for that. I did fancy a bit of a change, and I didn't know what was coming next, and I really just wanted to do something and just take some time and go traveling and backpacking for a while. But I still wanted to advance and progress my career at the same time. So I came up with a middle ground, which was doing a volunteering placement in a country that I wanted to go travel to anyway.
Mm.
So I found out about an organization called Accounting for International Development, which is kind of like Doctors Without Borders, except instead of saving lives, we save balance sheets.
Nice.
it's it's kind of also pretty important. So I did that, and when I got here, I did help them with their annual budget, pulling that together. But they also wanted some help with Excel, and my Excel skills at the time were pretty mediocre. Like I could do a pivot, but I couldn't do a VLOOKUP. I could do an if, but I couldn't do a sum if. But then they wanted some help with that, and I had some time on my hands, so I thought I would give them some semi-formal lessons. There were like four of them that would come to a room for an hour, and I would show them some things. And then as they asked me more questions, I looked stuff up to be able to answer them. And at that point, I became a little bit more interested. And as I finished that placement, I went into a stage of what to do next because I decided that I enjoyed the lifestyle here. So I wanted to stay.
Mhm.
And so I started doing a consulting contract with that organization that was paying me for a few days a month. But I thought I would try and offer those services to other organizations. And in order to get my name out there, I gave some free Excel training hour sessions
Mm.
where I would show people some tips and tricks, and then they would know who I was at least.
Yeah.
So with that, I ended up uh, giving this free training hours. Some people wanted to learn more Excel, and they're like, "We'll pay you if you teach us more." So I took that as an opportunity to, build another training course and then earn a little bit of money that way. And then I was doing some consulting, initially in accounting software systems, stuff
Okay.
like QuickBooks and Xero, but then also building some data analysis stuff and some more robust spreadsheeting. And then from there, I went into the BI space after Power BI got launched and started doing that while still always offering corporate training in Excel, but then also started doing presentation skills and email management tasks and things like that. Um, yeah. And then since then, I hired a few people. So our consulting practice grew to a few people, with
Mhm.
others coming in on larger projects as well.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, and we at the start of my time at Tax Systems, we used you guys for some Power BI work, which went really, really well. So definitely good to see that, the business has grown from a few hours here and there, a few days a month to multiple people, and really, really good stuff. And I think it's interesting, right? Because I distinctly remember back to my so when you move from one big four firm to another, it's no surprise you tend to get put on some form of gardening leave. My gardening leave, because I was very junior, was basically 8 weeks of not particularly interesting work. And during that time was when I really decided I'm going to learn some Excel stuff that I didn't know, and that stuff is still stuff I use today. Even really simple things that I now are totally second nature, like adding a row or adding a column, or deleting a row and deleting a column, but via shortcuts rather than using a mouse. Like little
Yeah.
stuff like that, which to you and many others will be totally, second nature, but to me, it's totally changed the way I used Excel at the time. And that was 13 years ago. So
Hmm.
these things stick with you, right? Which is a good thing. So I guess you've therefore snowballed from, a little bit of work here and there, a little bit of Excel, to what I consider to be excellent and very cool, but also probably very geeky, which is you are an Excel MVP. Tell us a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, so Microsoft have a denomination, an award that they give to a small group of people called MVP, which means most valued professional. It's kind of a take on the American sports term, like most valued player (MVP), but it's what Microsoft give in all of their different products. So you have MVPs for Windows, you have MVPs for Azure, you have MVPs for Excel, and it's really aimed at people who they feel are really valuable to that software. It's not necessarily the people who know absolutely everything there is to know about it, but it's more for people who are kind of, sharing stuff and spreading the love of Excel. I guess like the way we would use the term today, like influencers, if you like. I do a lot of sharing, usually a couple times a week on LinkedIn. I usually do about one video a week on YouTube. And I think that those are things like that. You also get some people who just do a lot of seminars and webinars, of which I do quite a lot as well. I did 3 webinars just last week for ICAW in different continents, and I'm doing one tomorrow as well. And
No.
then you get people who answer questions on forums and things like that. And then once a year, we all kind of get to meet in the Microsoft headquarters and just nerd out about Excel, where the
Yeah.
Excel dev team is there and they try and showcase us, like, what is it that the community of Excel users, there's about 2 billion of regular users. What is it that they want from the product? And here is some stuff that we have coming. What do you think about it? How can we use this to cater towards the needs of what some people want to do?
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
And it is impressive to me because there is always a pretty constant, steady stream of new stuff with a product that is so legacy, and they could just not they wouldn't ever leave it on the back burner, right? Because it's a core kind of part of what they offer as a business. But fundamentally, in a lot of institutions and organizations, you'd see that kind of software just kind of left on the shelf to carry on doing what it's doing without any kind of meaningful progression. But it feels like with Excel, they keep pushing forward, doing new things, doing things differently. And of course, now with everything going cloud ways and AI ways and all the rest of it, there's more and more stuff that it can be useful for. So, um,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah, there's roughly about 40 new features that they've released per year in the last couple of years, actually, which is
mm,
way more than anyone ever expects. From my experience, most Excel users, even the ones that are very proficient at Excel, they haven't looked at a new feature since like 2007.
Yeah.
Anyone that's still using VLOOKUP, as important, as huge as VLOOKUP is, I'm like, no, you shouldn't use VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP has been superseded. You tell me you're a VLOOKUPper, you're telling me that you're using fax machines and text messaging to communicate with people
Yeah.
around. And that's just one example. There are so many others.
Yeah.
Um,
If I'm index matching, am I at least better? I don't necessarily X look up yet. Well, I think I might do, but that's better, right?
Index matching is better, but index match was the huge complex workaround that we had to use because of VLOOKUP's uh, shortfalls. Whereas XLOOKUP is one that is does more than an index match, but yeah, is easier to write than a VLOOKUP. So it's kind of like I believe
Good
it's
win.
kind of like a win-win.
Yeah.
Um,
Nice. I did wonder how many episodes of the podcast we'd have to get into before we start talking about specific Excel functions. Maybe this is the point where people either dial off or really dial in. It's a real kind of fork in the road. I feel we've got to that point. So I guess back to something I referenced earlier. This kind of there's always been this rhetoric. Around the kind of tax industry from the technology side of, Excel's dead, Excel shouldn't be used anymore. MTD for VAT was very interesting. I'm sure you remember back to the first consultations where the very first consultation on MTD for VAT, I can't remember which year it was, but back in maybe 2015 or 16 said, we're gonna basically ban the use of Excel. Excel's gone. You must use kind of full software. And then that got rode back on. And by the time it came out, Excel was then very much allowed and used in specific ways. You still have to have your kind of linkages, but fundamentally Excel is used by, I would presume, most people who do their VAT returns in the UK. So that all kind of changed. But I guess what's your take on that, having seen it from your perspective?
so there's always talk about Excel is dead. I think that proper database people who are probably the people who are behind the MTD for VAT and lots of other things, they hate Excel. When
Yeah.
I go to a data conference and I'm the Excel guy, everyone's like, "Oh, I hate the people in my business who use Excel," because they're under this illusion that yes, Excel has its problems because, it's not robust. You don't have columns that are validated. You can type in anything in every cell. You can link formulas that are easy to break, etc. There's not really much control. So the database people don't like it because essentially they don't like it because they really think that humans are going to break everything.
Mm,
Whereas like humans like Excel because you can type anything you want in a cell and it's not necessarily difficult to use. And sure, you have really advanced functionality that 99.9% of Excel users will never know, will never need to know, or maybe it would be useful for them, but they will never know, but they can still use Excel. And I think that because it's so easy to use, people will always use it. And a lot of the people who say Excel is dead are people that are completely unaware that Excel is releasing 40 plus new features every single year. So often when they tell me that Excel is dead and they'll argue their points, I'm like, oh, but you do realize that you can co-author Excel desktop from multiple users at the same time. They're like, what? Can you?
mhm.
I'm like, yeah, you can. I'm like, you do realize that Excel has an ETL tool called Power Query, which is able to fetch data and completely reorganize it and restructure it. And like, oh, so yeah, so they have no idea about
Yeah.
the product they're talking about being dead is not Excel. It's Excel 2003. And I'll agree, Excel 2003 is dead. It's been over 20 years since that product existed. So just learn the new stuff, and then it's not.
Yeah, no, and that's an interesting take, and I remember in a previous business actually you came and did some Excel training for us, and that was some of the stuff I knew probably more than others in the room, but then some of the stuff I didn't know, and yeah, those kind of things. That some of the data wrangling tools, it's a constant challenge we always get in the world of tax. So therefore, even having that sort of stuff is just really valuable to the people in the room and others. So again, another plug for your YouTube and your videos because there's loads of content on that sort of stuff. So that's
Thank
really
you.
good. But I think, okay, so if for our listeners who are predominantly tax people, then, so any, I guess, top three new things they should know about that are relevant for tax, anything you can think of?
Top three new things. So Power Query is really huge. It's this idea that you can get data that is in one form and completely transform it to another shape. completely reshape it. And that's really relevant because in businesses that use external software, you'll often export from that software version to Excel. Then you'll have your merge rows, you'll have your group data, you'll have your hidden
Yeah.
rows and columns, you'll have your subtotals, and then you can't do anything with it. If you want to make that into like a pivot table or use a sum if formula to analyze it, you need to then manually every single time delete the rows you don't need, filter
Mm.
out blank data, and do all of these steps. But what Power Query allows you to do is set these steps one time and then reuse them. Power Query is on the data tab in Excel. On the left-hand side, it's not the word Power Query is difficult to find, but get data from table,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
data tab on the left, and then that will open up the Power Query editor, which is really, really huge. Some of the other stuff is stock history. So Excel has a function now that can get you the exchange rate on any given day historically, which is
Oh,
hugely useful for for tax purposes, for other accounting purposes when you're dealing with cross currency translations and things. So equal stock history, use that. Really, really useful. Well, what's better to do is have a date in a cell that you want to refer to, and then do like the currency pair, so USD slash GBP or something like that. They will get that to you. Just released on Friday. Checkboxes in a cell. So
okay.
this is a nice little feature where you can just multi-select some cells, put in some checkboxes in each, and you can just tick them as you go along. Good for task lists, good for paid, unpaid column, things like that.
That sounds like it would be quite. I can see people trying to build their own sort of web forms now in Excel, where you can tick things and do stuff with them.
Yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. So that's something that's been in Google Sheets for years and years that I've always loved
Yeah.
in Google Sheets, and now it's come to Excel.
And that's actually an interesting question because I can't profess to know much about Google Sheets, but the general kind of, I guess, sentiment I've always seen is that Google Sheets actually, from a functionality point of view, has often been cited as being ahead of Excel. There's more stuff in there. But obviously, the
Mm.
usage of Excel is way outstrips the usage of Google Sheets, I guess. Do you think
Yeah.
that's just because Microsoft were there first and they got into businesses and into schools and all the rest of it, or is there something different?
Um, Yeah, so it's interesting because a lot of the people who are kind of in my space in terms of Excel MVPs and people that blog and publish a lot about Excel, there are very few of them that actually take Google Sheets seriously. Almost every one of them is like, well, of course Excel is better than Google Sheets. And I'm like, did you know that actually Google Sheets has more functions than Excel, more formula functions? And they find that like, completely mind-blowing, but it does. There are definitely things that Excel has that Google doesn't. The main one at the moment being Power Query that I just mentioned earlier, because for me it's such a monumental piece of work that I need to use in my daily work that Google doesn't have. But they just introduced tables last month, which Excel has had for ages and Google hasn't. The format as table feature, but I really like how they do their data input strategies. So they've got much better data validation. They've got date pickers. They had checkboxes for a while. Yeah, and there's the query function, which can use kind of like the query language. They use an SQL-like
Mm,
language to write out queries and formulas. That's something that's really useful. And definitely the collaboration angle. I mean, Excel doesn't
yeah,
come close with being easily to collaborate with. So I use both. In some of my consulting projects, I'll use Google, and others I'll use Excel. Depends on what the client is using, what
yeah.
what what package they have. But sometimes, if it's open-ended, I will choose Google if there's a lot of data entry and they want autocomplete validation lists and they want date pickers and they want checkboxes and things like that.
Nice. And I guess last question on kind of Excel before we move on to a slightly different topic was any kind of shortcuts that people should know, any kind of things. And as I said earlier, the one I always found was adding and removing columns and rows by keyboard rather than mouse. I always found that a big difference, but I'm guessing you know a rather few more things that
Yeah.
are quite interesting and useful.
Yeah, no, definitely. So when it comes to shortcuts, the ones that are worth learning are the ones that you're doing very regularly. So if you're doing an action more than once an hour when you're using Excel, then you should learn the shortcut for that. But there are loads of very obscure ones that you don't need to learn. So some of my favorite ones are go to next worksheet. How often do you use that? That's control and page down. Really, really useful. If you are in a laptop without page down and page up, control and FN and the down arrow key will do that same thing. Paste values, paste as values. It's a new shortcut, came out last year, Control Shift V. It's kind of like Control V, but add on the shift.
So I've been doing Control ESV since 2011 when I moved jobs. So that's good to know they bought, because I always found that really weird, right? You have to end up sort of typing. It's not really, doesn't feel like a shortcut.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. So they finally got Control Shift V, which is actually one they took from Google as well. Control ampersand is put borders around. So
yeah,
that's really good. You select some cells, Control ampersand is borders. And one of my favorite ones, especially for people that are dealing with US type systems, the US European date issue, right? This
yeah.
annoys everyone. The Americans, for some odd reason, decided to put the month before the date. And that's broken spreadsheets and databases in the entire world since the dawn of them, and it will do till the end of days. Um, that's why one of my favorite shortcuts is Control Shift and hashtag, which will change the dates to day MMMYY. So
Yeah.
3 letters for the month. So you have MAR as March, and that doesn't matter whether you're reading this as an American or whether you're reading it as a Brit. 6 MAR 17 will read as the 6th of March 2017. Yeah,
Nice.
so that's one of my favorites.
That sounds quite useful. That's a good one to know. Cool. So moving away slightly, I guess, and on to kind of broader Microsoft tech then. So as I said, it's always some form of mention of AI, either the entire podcast or some mention of the podcast, but Gen AI being the thing that I spend a lot of my time doing. What's your take on Copilot? Obviously, you've been as a person that's very close to Microsoft. What's your take on that more broadly? Good to get your thoughts.
So that's a really interesting question. When you talk about Copilot, it's actually used as an umbrella term for multiple different subproducts. So the free Copilot is Microsoft's version of ChatGPT, which you can use inside your web browser, inside Microsoft Edge. It also comes in Windows, but you can just ask natural language questions and it can, generate multiple things. So it can generate like an email they might send to someone. In our case, it can generate an Excel formula. I find it really, really useful to generate Excel formulas. You can say something like, write an Excel formula that extracts every character before the hyphen in cell A2. That will give you a really, really good formula for that. So I love using it for formulas. I also talk about Copilot because it's also a paid product within Microsoft 365. You've got Microsoft 365 Copilot, which is $30 per user per month. And you've got Copilot Pro, which is $20 per user per month. The last time I checked, they hadn't translated it directly into pounds values,
Mm,
but yeah, that's roughly the price. And what you get with that is you get Copilot inside your Excel. So it's a button on your home tab on the right-hand side, and then you get a sidebar with Copilot inside your Excel, but it's for Microsoft 365. So you get it inside Microsoft Word, you get it inside Outlook, inside PowerPoint. The Copilot for Microsoft 365 also comes in Teams, and it comes in Microsoft Forms and other apps like that. So I would say for that, from what you can do with it is you have a sidebar where you can type natural language questions.
yeah.
So you can say like, add me a column that will extract everything after the space in the last cell. You can say, write me a column that can add together these 3 previous columns. And they keep developing it. They just last month, they added the ability to reference another table. So
Mm,
look up the fruit column in the pricing table and then return the price from that thing. Use it, and that will use probably an Xlookup function. And yeah, and it can do other things like you can say, highlight every cell in red if it's above 30. You can say bold the text in this column. You can also say like, analyze this data, give me the top 3 vendors in terms of sales in the
mm.
Pacific region, that sort of thing. So my take on it is, honestly, it's not there yet. At the moment, it only works with Excel tables. Almost every Excel user doesn't know what a table is. They assume what they're doing is currently already a table.
Yeah.
Excel has a format as table feature in the Home tab, and that is the feature that they're using. Excel tables are brilliant, and I highly advise people to look into using them if they aren't already. But the fact of the matter is almost every Excel user doesn't use them. So that's already limiting CoPilot to a very small number of users.
Mm.
Um, as well as that, it often fails with me. As I said, it can do bold or filtering text, but how many Excel users don't know how to make text bold and filter them themselves?
Yeah.
Conditional formatting, I highlight text that contains the word wheel. That could be something that is interesting to use because not everyone knows how to do that. But it does take a long time and it's a little bit more limited than doing conditional formatting manually at the moment. Um, the example I gave of like, give me the top 3 vendors. There is actually an AI feature in Excel that's been around for 4 years called Analyze Data in the Home tab, and that's available without paying additional money, apart from the Microsoft 365 license. And that can do pretty much the same thing. Not exactly the same thing, but pretty much the same thing. So I do feel like Excel Copilot, the paid version, is going to get there and it's going to be absolutely game changing eventually. But for the moment, I personally think for Excel, it's not quite there yet. It even says it's in preview at the moment. So they're very
Um,
aware that it's in preview. That's
yeah,
good.
and it's, I had a Copilot license for a couple of months and don't have it anymore. I found it very, very useful in Teams, but didn't find it
Yeah.
useful in Excel or PowerPoint. I think I'm with you that they will get this right. Right, this is Microsoft. They are betting the proverbial farm on this thing.
Yeah.
They are pouring an awful lot of resource and time and energy into it. So I think I'm with you that yes, it's not there yet, but it will wind the clock forward some years. They'll get there. It's just a question of how fast they'll get there, and some of that's kind of outside of their control, right? Because some of that's down to central models and stuff that they don't actually build, right? They don't, they're using OpenAI tech typically.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
they only own a portion of that. I guess more broadly, then, having seen lots of different versions of AI, generative or otherwise, over the last however many years, I guess what's your take? What's your predictions, and what else have you seen that people might find useful?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think there is no question that Gen AI is transforming the way that we work in the world. I think that as well as Copilot, there are some other tools within Excel that are doing really well with AI. So at the moment, only in Excel Online, but you've got formula by examples whereby you can start typing in a column and then Excel will try and work out what you're doing. So you can do one for rounding numbers, you can do one for extracting the day of the week from a date, you can do one for extracting the first 5 characters from a cell, things like that. And then there's also data cleanup. This is brand new. This just got launched. For example, if you have like John spelt with an H, you have John spelt without an H, you have Johnny. Excel might be able to say, these people look like they're the same. Would you like me to change it to all the same person? Which
Nice.
is really awesome. And, also it will say, if you've got a hyphen or sometimes you've got a dot in between words, it will say,
Yeah.
these look the same. Would you like to combine these? Something that's actually really, really difficult to do with formulas and even very difficult to do with Power Query. So that's something that's just being released called Clean Data inside Excel Online. So those things are coming up. And I find that some applicability to data analysis is still a little bit limited. And I think this is why Microsoft Copilots for Excel is a little bit behind where it is for things like Word or Teams, as you mentioned, which I think Copilot for Teams is fantastic. But when it comes to spreadsheets and needing to give you exact answers, it becomes more difficult to produce a necessarily tangible and useful result.
Yeah.
I think that this is the struggle that they're having, where large language models, they work well when there's sort of a blurry idea for how it could look, things like image generation or things like writing out a script or something like that. Whereas when it comes to like exact stuff, it is a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
As we both said, I feel like it will get there for spreadsheeting, but I think that it is going to just take a little bit longer than other applications.
Nice. Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's still, that's the thing, right? We're still very early on in this technology. There's no doubt it's going to change a lot. Already has changed quite a lot. But as to where and when and what and the best use cases and the worst use cases and all the rest of it. I think we've got an idea, but we certainly, every time something comes up and the GPT 4.0 launch came and everyone was like, oh, that's a totally different take on this stuff. It's not just about having the most powerful central model. It's actually about a collection of smaller models and actually about, reducing the friction of using these things. So you're not asking a question and waiting 30 seconds for an answer, because that's not how humans work. Humans don't kind of, we don't ask a question, just sit there quietly and go, da, 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 da. So all those things it's a really interesting thing to follow. And we could nerd out on that for a while, but I will close with one kind of philosophical question. So, we walked into that training room at Kaplan in Angel back in 2008. God, I'm making myself feel old just saying it. But if you could speak to you back then, knowing what you know now, what would you say to 2008 version of you?
Learn Excel, learn how to use Excel as well as you can use your smartphone. I mean, honestly, a lot of the buttons that people don't tend to know, like how to delete everything in a cell, including the formatting and the contents in one go. Almost every Excel user doesn't know how to do that. But these are not like complex formulas that will conceptually take time to learn, but just learn how to use the functionality, learn how to use the buttons, and just, yeah, get better at that. And that will make you way more efficient in your time and also allow you to present data more confidently because you know there are fewer errors in it. And it's not actually that hard to learn a lot of these things. Just spend some time learning that.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. My brain is full of things to now go and poke around on Excel and try and reteach myself how to paste values. For one, I'm sure there'll be other things, but really appreciate your time and thank you for coming on the podcast. And no doubt we will speak soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, Russell. Thanks for the invite.
You are very welcome. See you later.